Siema, Debunking. Dziś zaczynamy lighta od steaka. Kurde, ale piękny steak. Pomali się rozpada. Takie mięciutkie mięsko. Piękny jest. Dałem mu 10 minut na stronę. Kurde, jeszcze kawałek. Jeszcze kawałek to zjem na surowo. To jeszcze wcześniej poza kamerami, bo ładowałem telefon. Zjadłem sobie takiego skyra. 44 gramy białka. Ile tego jest w ogóle? Nie wiem nawet. A, 500 gram. 500 gram skyra. Zjedzone. Ale teraz przechodzimy do właściwego posiłku. Mleko bio, ale jakieś mało tłuste. Ale dobrze smakuje. Krata na brzuchu jest. Jakby się ktoś martwił. Właśnie wagi nie sprawdzałem. - 102 kg. Dokładnie 102,6. To jak zjemy steki, to będzie 103.
Bateria 100%.
Ale mi się zaczyna podobać. Ja już wam mówiłem, że dla mnie to to wszystko, co nam przekazują w tych mediach, to jest teatr dla gojów. I sobie zdaję z tego sprawę, że tak jest. Ale mimo to cieszę się z tego, co się dzieje teraz. No, w końcu ktoś z tych aktorów powiedział, że Ukraina jest winna wojnie z Rosją. To mnie cieszy. Putin zaczyna być pokazywany w mediach. Także wydaje mi się, że bliżej końca niż dalej. Wiadomo, że to nie jest, żebyście nie myśleli, że to ja uważam, że to jest dzięki Trumpowi czy coś, bo ja uważam, że to jest i tak wszystko ustawione, tylko po prostu tak to zorganizowali to przedstawienie, żebyśmy myśleli, że tu właśnie Trumpa wybrali zamiast tego Bidena i teraz będzie pokój na świecie. To jest wiadomo wszystko teatr, ale mimo wszystko i tak się człowiek cieszy, że świat powraca tutaj w Europie do normalności. Dobrze. W ogóle nie odczułem tego. Co to jest pół litra krwi oddać? Jak dorosły facet, taki jak ja, to ma pewnie z 6 litrów krwi, to jak tam pół litra oddam, to co to ja odczuję? Jeszcze był weekend, kurde, to do roboty nie musiałem być, a i tak nawet zrobiłem przecież 2 treningi przez weekend. Także już się, to po oddaniu krwi to ja w ogóle nie odczuwam oddania krwi. Ja mam wysoką hemoglobinę. Hemoglobinę przed oddaniem krwi miałem ponad 18. 18 chyba. Mówiła mi dokładnie, ale nie pamiętam. No ponad 18 miałem hemoglobinę. Także jak mi tam brakło pół litra, to zaraz organizm odbuduje to wszystko. Tak. Mieszkam w Szwajcarii. O, średni człowiek. Kobiety mają mniej, mężczyźni więcej. Ja myślę, że mam z 6 litrów. Zależy od wagi, od mięśni. Od wielu czynników zależy ilość krwi. Ja ważę 100 kg, to myślę, że 100-kilowy koleś to raczej ma 6 litrów. Poza tym to nie był mój pierwszy raz w życiu, jak krew oddawałem. Ja oddaję krew chyba od studiów. Chyba na studiach pierwszy raz oddałem krew. Albo nie, wcześniej, kurwa. Nie wiem od ilu lat. Chuj. Ale z 20 lat... Z 20 lat już chyba oddaję krew. Wiem, że w Polsce są dawane takie legitymacje honorowego dawcy krwi. No to ja taką już mam. To tam nie wiem, ile trzeba oddać. Żeby dostać taką legitymację honorowego dawcy, to w Polsce trzeba oddać chyba z 20 litrów. No to tyle mam oddane. W Polsce, a w Szwajcarii pierwszy raz. Ale w Szwajcarii nie ma czegoś takiego jak honorowy dawca krwi. Po prostu jak ktoś oddaje, to oddaje, jak nie oddaje, to nie oddaje. Nie nagradzają tego w żaden sposób. Nie ma też dnia wolnego w robocie. Ja po robocie oddałem krew. No, zjadam sobie go powoli, tego mioda. Sześć litrów wystarczy. No to nawet nie wiedziałem, że tak mało. Wiem, że mam tą legitymację. A, zasłużony. 20. To ja nie wiem, czy mam tego już zasłużonego. Nie wiem, czy nie mam. A nie wiem ile. Nie chcę was kłamać. Wiem, że mam jakąś legitymację, ale zostawiłem ją w Polsce. Już 4 lata nie byłem w Polsce. Nawet nie pamiętam, jak ta legitymacja wygląda. Wiem, że dostałem. Tylko nie wiem, czy to był honorowy, czy... Honorowy chyba. Na zasłużonego to bym tyle razy to chyba bym nie dał. Nie wiem. Nie, chyba mam honorowego. Nie wiem. Sam nie wiem. Bo nie wydaje mi się, że aż 20 litrów oddał. Ale już od dawna oddaję. No są poznałem już parę osób, co nie zna niemieckiego i pracuje. Na pewno trudniej mają takie osoby, ale pracują. Zależy, co się umie. Jak się jest dobry w swoim fachu, to i bez języka Szwajcarzy docenią taką osobę, nie? Moim zdaniem jednak najważniejsze w Szwajcarii są umiejętności. Jak ktoś jest dobry w swojej dziedzinie, to nawet jak ktoś nie zna języka, to Szwajcarzy docenią taką osobę. Ale no jak już minimum bo jakaś komunikacja musi być, no to najlepiej oczywiście niemiecki, a jak nie niemiecki, no to minimum, żeby ten angielski znać. Jak ktoś się zna tylko polski, to raczej nie polecałbym Szwajcarii. Chociaż takie osoby też poznałem tutaj w Szwajcarii. Ale to oni wyjeżdżają z ekipami jakimiś polskimi. Że jest tam, nie wiem, w jakiejś grupie ktoś, co zna niemiecki i tłumaczy za całą resztę. No to takie przypadki też są sporadyczne, ale samemu jak się nie zna języków obcych, to Szwajcarii bym nie polecał. Mleko piję. Ja najlepiej w niemieckim, na drugim miejscu angielski, na trzecim rosyjski. No i takie, to nie liczę nawet takich języków. Czy tam ze Czechem, czy ze Słowakiem, to też się dogadam. Ale to są bardzo pokrewne języki. Nie, to raczej nie jestem zasłużony. To pewnie jestem tym honorowym. Ale dobrze, że w końcu ten teatr polityczny światowy wraca do normalności powoli. Mleko. Nic się nie stało wokół. Siema. Co jedno inne dziś mam? Lecimy się posprzątać. Wracaj do Polski. Po co ja mam wracać do Polski? Nie rozumiem. Ja lajta robię w Szwajcarii. W Szwajcarii jest tak ciepło. Po co mam wracać do Polski? No, nie rozumiem. Ale po co? Dalej nie rozumiem, po co ja mam wracać do Polski. Mi się podoba w Szwajcarii. Ja robię lighty robię na YouTubie. Chyba jestem najbardziej dopakowanym tym youtuberem w internecie. Kurde, ale wam się podoba mój light.
So far in my psychedelic journey, I've explored LSD and psilocybin. But it's MDMA, otherwise known as ecstasy, that stands poised to become the first of this group of banned drugs to be legalized for treatment. That brings me to the place where this chapter of the psychedelic renaissance begins, in the laboratory of a legendary chemist named Sasha Shulgin. Hello, Paul.
Michael, so good to see you again.
Paul Daly was Sasha's colleague, and today carries on his legacy. MDMA, is it a psychedelic? How is it like and unlike those substances?
Well, okay, broadly speaking, the term psychedelic comes from the Greek psyche and delos, so it's mind manifesting. So certainly from that broad kind of definition, you could say that MDMA is a psychedelic. But the mechanism of action is quite different from psilocybin, mescaline, LSD. Those three turn on the serotonin 2A receptor, which is accepted now as the main seat of the psychedelic effect. MDMA works differently. It causes a flood of serotonin, so this feeling of openness, of loving connection to others is really ascribed to that flood of serotonin.
So this molecule, MDMA, disappears from science, as far as we know, for many years.
For many years.
And Sasha's contribution was to bring it back, or resynthesize it.
Right.
Why was Sasha able to do this without fear of getting busted?
Well, first off, he was a world-renowned expert in the field, of which there were not many. And Sasha had a Schedule I license from the DEA.
You're making a material that's never been looked at before. Is it psychedelic? You don't know. You can't go to the literature because it's not in the literature. It's a brand new thing.
So where did MDMA come from? Well, it's got this weird history that doesn't exactly parallel psychedelic history. It was patented back in 1912 by Merck, one of the world's leading pharmaceutical companies, when its researchers were looking for a blood clotting agent. And in the process of developing this drug, they synthesized MDMA. They never tested it. They never marketed it. It just sat on the shelf until the 1970s. That's when Sasha Shulgin
Gdzie mieszkam? W Szwajcarii.
It was out of patent, and as he did with all his research chemicals, he took it himself first, at small doses, escalating gradually, and he found that it had really interesting qualities.
53-minute smooth shift into a light intoxication, distinct, almost early alcohol-like intoxication. Using the art of a chemist, I saw a potential new tool used in therapy in human relationships, or a person's relationship with himself.
It was through Sasha Shulgin that MDMA was first introduced to Leo Zeff, a retired Bay Area psychotherapist.
Leo took a couple looks at him and said, "What are you on, and where can I get some?" And he realized immediately the effect that it could have in psychiatric practice.
Leo tried it and
Siema Waldemarze wspaniały.
that he decided to come out of retirement and work with it.
Dzisiaj jest ogromna zazdrość w internecie. Wlatuje steak. Ludzi w Polsce nie stać już na steaka. Muszą zazdrościć.
And when they know there's not going to be any sex, nobody's worried about what might happen.
Yeah.
You can let go to their really loving feelings.
Ludziom w Polsce teraz musi wystarczyć oglądanie mnie, jak jem steaka.
Changes your all's relationship. You all seem so much in love with each other. Have they really opened your heart to each other? Have they?
Wiadomo, nie wszyscy, ale ci, co się tutaj
And Anne Shulgin, his wife,
udzielają
MDMA.
w komentarzach,
She took
nie
it
wszyscy,
very
tylko w
impressively
większości,
and told her friends. She was friends with a whole community of therapists in the Bay Area, and they quickly took it up. This was a legal drug at the time. This is the late 70s, early 80s.
no widzę, że tak już ich
Dan would later write about
dopadła
MDMA and
inflacja,
other
że
experiences in her and Sasha's
nawet na stejka ich nie
psychedelic
stać dobrego.
another love story. You have lived to see this medicine that you have had such an important role in introducing people to, now getting recognized.
The magic of MDMA is that it allows you to see who you are without self-rejection. That is what it's for, is insight. It doesn't have the moving walls and, speaking roses, but it gives you insight into yourself, and it's especially good for PTSD.
The first time that I was ever diagnosed with PTSD was right after Hurricane Katrina. Everybody that I know was diagnosed with PTSD because we had all gone through this traumatic event. Before that, I thought that PTSD was something that happened to
No
soldiers.
co Waldemarze wspaniały się takiego złego dzieje w tej Polsce?
And then after that, in 2006, I was raped, and I subsequently became pregnant from that rape and had to seek an abortion, which in the South is a traumatic event on its own. The hits just kind of kept coming in a way that I was not fully able to process any of it. There was such a part of me that did not want to be defined by these tragedies that had happened to me. I wanted to sweep them all under the rug. I didn't want to be known as the girl whose brother overdosed. I didn't want to be known as the girl whose mother killed 2 people and herself. And that was before I had been raped. So in my quest to heal myself, I took antidepressants, anti-anxieties, I took medicine for ADHD, and none of those ever got to the core of the problem. They just masked me into maybe not wanting to kill myself, but also not really wanting to do anything. I didn't feel any closer to who I am. So when I was accepted into the study, I was hesitant because I had tried so many therapies and modalities. Just basically, I've thrown everything but the kitchen sink at myself. Therapies and modalities, just basically, I've thrown everything but the kitchen sink at myself. MDMA therapy is specifically this perfect scenario to deal with trauma. People can talk about their trauma and process it in different ways.
I've been so adamant about not allowing it to define me that it's like slowly been destroying me.
I was just running this constant anxiety and fear loop in my mind, like all the time, underneath the surface, constantly worrying, constantly afraid.
There must be some reason I deserve these things. Because otherwise, why would they keep happening?
In PTSD, the amygdala is hyperactive, and that's the part of the brain that is involved with the fight or flight response. And the kind of the rationalization part of the brain is not as active. And with MDMA, that's reversed.
Now try imagining yourself as a little girl.
As the drug came on, the most beautiful memories were coming to me of my brother Davin and I. And there was one in particular of us playing in the snow together. I remember feeling in my body the excitement of a child when they feel snow and the joy of just playing. I hadn't felt that level of joy in so long in my life. And at that point, I hadn't really thought of Davin very much. The situation with my mother really overshadowed the loss of my brother.
You need to leave. He's so hard. You know, because he was 2 years old in the day we grew up. We did everything together. We looked alike, and people thought we were twins.
When my brother was 22 years old, he came to visit me to celebrate his 22nd birthday. And the night of his birthday, he went out and he overdosed and he died. You know, for my mother, this was a moment where she really didn't ever truly recover.
I know that a lot of my mother's demise was because she lost custody.
In July of
Proszę nie
2005,
zazdrościć mistejka.
I was trying to reach my mother on the phone and I couldn't get her. And then I was trying to reach her partner, Julie, who I was extremely close with. and I
Widzę
couldn't reach her
zazdrość.
either. And I was also
Stay
trying
home.
to reach Lark, who was a very close friend of the family, and I couldn't reach her. So I ended up driving to my mother's house. My mother had been sitting in a rocking chair, and I could see the lividity of the blood in her arm, and I could see her revolver on the floor in front of her. And then she had shot herself through the heart. And so there was such a fear of walking any further in because of what else I would discover. I couldn't recall certain things. It was as if my memory of the circumstances was a videotape and someone had come in and edited out certain parts of that videotape. And in my MDMA session, I was able to go into that memory and walk fully back into that room. Julie's body was in the den and Lark was in the other side of the room. And my mother shot both Julie and Lark through the heart. I completely at the time disassociated from the event because it was just too much for me to take in.
You know, I had these three women that were such a huge part of it. And then to lose all that, so, you know, left me completely untethered and trying to navigate what to do with that horrendous fear.
Hearing people come to this place, it's like this energy is in the room where you can feel that they're coming from their deepest truth. I mean, I literally get the chills just talking about it even right now because it's so powerful.
Are you confident you're going to keep on feeling it? Or are you scared about that?
I think it's a practice.
One of the beautiful things that came out of this is that I was able to finally be present to my life. Like, because of my PTSD, it robbed me of my own life for years. You know, trauma history aside, I have a very wonderful life. And I have a beautiful family, and I have a beautiful home, and I'm safe. And so to be in an experience wholly, not just your mind, not just your body, but to wholly be present for something is such a gift. Because that's where we have this capacity for the most joy, or the most pain, or whatever it is, but at least we feel it, and we know it's real, and we experience it, as opposed to living dully in a life where you're just constantly afraid, where you can't access the love that surrounds you. I actually did not even know that psychedelics had been used in the field of psychiatry back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. In all of my schooling and training, that was never mentioned.
So I'd like to open up this afternoon's program with Timothy Leary.
How about a round of applause for our host here,
In Rick Doblin, we have a case of another passionate amateur changing the course of history. I mean, he really is a hero of this movement.
What made us so convinced of the potential of MDMA was taking MDMA, and seeing what came from it. I took it with my girlfriend and seeing how we could discuss difficult emotional issues with a lot more peace, a lot more respect, a lot more listening, and it just felt so profound. I had decided this is my calling when I was 18. I started experimenting with psychedelics, with LSD, with mescaline, and it started opening me up to my emotions. My family is Jewish, and I was raised on stories of the Holocaust. I grew up with a bunch of these violent political assassinations. The Vietnam War was raging. the riots were happening in America. And I thought, if people can have this experience of connection with nature, connection with everything, then it's going to be harder to dehumanize others. And it's going to be harder to commit genocide. And it's going to be harder to see people as your enemy that you have to kill. And so I thought, what I'll start to do is prepare to be a psychedelic therapist. When I found out about MDMA in 1982, around 500,000 doses had been used in these underground therapy settings.
MDMA was legal until 1985. But like the psychedelics, it escaped the lab or the therapy room and entered the counterculture.
One of the people that had tried MDMA in these therapeutic circles decided to brand it as ecstasy and build a massive distribution. People were able to purchase it by calling an 800 number, using their credit cards. It was sold in open settings, and that it was being marketed as a legal substance. And so it was just obvious that the police were going to pick up on this.
Ecstasy.
Ecstasy.
Ecstasy, the psychedelic of the 80s. Tuning in, turning on, and dropping out. 1985.
What was then happening was Phil Donahue was doing a TV show about MDMA, ecstasy. And so I was in the audience.
Well, guess what? We've got another drug, and it makes you love everybody. It's called ecstasy. Now, who doesn't want to take ecstasy?
Phil, the drug has been around for several years, but what we've seen in the last couple of years is an escalation of the availability.
What are you concerned about? A lot of young kids bouncing around?
Precisely. The other thing is when we apprehend these people, they can be dealt with. At the present time, it's not against the law.
So you can't apprehend them now?
We cannot.
But you really want to, don't you?
I think it's important.
It was clear that it was doomed. On the Phil Donahue show, you heard there was this potential scare of neurotoxicity, and Gene Hayslip decided to declare an emergency.
This morning, the Drug Enforcement Administration is announcing its intention to place the drug known as MDMA, or by the street name ecstasy, under emergency controls in Schedule 1.
You must have had strong feelings when MDMA was made illegal. I mean, here was this material that you were getting good results with. You did? You cried?
I told everyone I knew, everyone I told everyone they knew. I think I wasn't the only one crying, believe me. I mean, that was such a loss.
Because people were using it at the time and just had to stop.
Well, no, they went underground.
The DEA had no knowledge of the therapeutic use of MDMA. All they knew was ecstasy. So when it was emergency scheduled, I just felt heartbroken. That's when I realized that to really move forward, we needed an FDA strategy.
Just as MDMA was being criminalized, Doblin launched a nonprofit, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, or MAPS, with the improbable mission of bringing psychedelics like MDMA back into mainstream medicine.
And the purpose of this benefit is to try to both bring us all together as a community, but also to try to raise funds to stimulate more research into trying to make MDMA into medicine.
But in order to do this, Doblin realized that he would first have to master the whole federal drug approval process, a daunting and complex regulatory regime. So he enrolls in a PhD program at the Kennedy School at Harvard and gets his PhD. And what is his dissertation? And it's this thick. I happen to own a copy of it. It's the drug approval process from beginning to end and how you would get MDMA approved. It, in fact, is the roadmap that everyone in this movement is following. Not just people trying to get MDMA approved, but the people that are trying to get psilocybin approved. They're following a map laid out by Rick Doblin.
1988 was dubbed the second summer of love because of the explosion of ecstasy and house music.
Pozdrawiam Barbara.
However, in in the UK, ecstasy was already illegal. I was 18, living in London as a student, going to medical school. It was a really special time. There were sort of old hippies who'd done all this in the 60s, lots and lots of kids, black and white. There was no ego, no male aggression, no patriarchy. It really was, as cheesy as it sounds, this kind of generation coming together to worship the bass. The drug MDMA was central to...
Zjemy sobie trochę miodu.
It was what bound everyone together. I can remember one time after a rave, all of us lying around, all loved up, and somebody said, "Oh wow, this is amazing, it's so beautiful, everything's so perfect." And someone said, "Let's think of the worst possible thing we can imagine." And someone said, let's imagine our mum is dying." And then someone said, "It's not that bad." And I didn't know it then, but that really was what MDMA does. It allows you to think about and go to those dark, difficult, forbidden, avoidant memories that you normally wouldn't be able to touch. But for some reason on MDMA, the fear and pain that would be associated with those memories is switched off. One of the things that's really driven me in my work with children and abuse is you see how the general public have so much empathy and gushing sentimentality for abused children and these poor little 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds. By the time they're in their 20s and 30s, they're alcoholic and they're addicted to heroin. And suddenly, the public have turned off their empathy switch and we've forgotten the developmental roots of that. And so as I moved in my own career away from child and adolescent psychiatry into adult addictions, what became patently clear was that these patients in their 30s, 40s, 50s with alcohol and opioid addictions were the same cohort of living 4, 5, 6-year-olds that I'd cared for in the past. This is B17, session 2. I mean that trauma underpins a lot of addictions, in particular autism. But no one had ever done anything.
Steki szwajcarskie są najlepsze.
If it works for PTSD, maybe MDMA will work for addictions. So we developed this world's first MDMA addiction study. MDMA has similar effects to classic psychedelics, but at a much, much lower level. So it allows you to think about old narratives with new eyes, if you know. You experienced an extremely dramatic life at the age of 12. And it caused problems lifelong thereafter. And I say you would make a good prognosis. Most people with trauma don't require MDMA. You know, you sit down with a therapist and over the weeks and months you learn mechanisms to dampen that fear response and to overcome and put to bed those issues. And that's fine for 50% of cases. But it's the 50% who just can't do that. This is participant B17, session number 3, MDMA session number 1. A lot of people think MDMA just raises serotonin. It's a lot more sophisticated than that. It increases a sense of positive mood, the kind of euphoria, that ecstasy part if you want, reduction of anxiety and depression, which is valuable part of psychotherapy. And they see that light and they see that
Tu ktoś fajnie napisał. Bez kitu. Się ludzie prują, wyzywają typa. On sobie siedzi po prostu, bez koszulki. Się nawet nie odzywa praktycznie, a kasa leci na konto. To jest piękne. Dożyliśmy takich pięknych czasów, że typ se siedzi bez koszulki przed internetem, przed telefonem, robi lightowo i kasa wpada na konto. Nawet nic nie muszę mówić.
The drug sessions themselves with MDMA, you encourage the patient to be with the drug experience. Let's let the medicine do its work.
To jest piękne. Dziękuję, dziękuję. Dziękuję za komentarze. Dawajcie dalej.
The medicine sort of knows where to go. It increases the release of oxytocin. And oxytocin is a hormone that's released from the brains of breastfeeding mothers, which
Ja w Szwajcarii jestem.
connectivity and empathy. And then another mechanism is the amphetamine part of the molecule has a speeding up or motivating aspect, which helps the patient engage in the therapy.
I'm in charge. I'm in charge. Not your bit. I'm in charge. You've done your bit, now shut off. Get out.
You're going to become the master of your own mind then. With everything to control you. You can tell it what to think.
Na stałe mieszkam, na stałe.
Now, it was a small study, but it's a great starting point. I think as we look forward into the future for MDMA and other psychedelics, I think we're going to see a broadening of different conditions and diagnoses.
Studies exploring the therapeutic potential of MDMA are now proliferating all around the world. But this research follows on the heels of decades of misinformation and flawed science.
In 2001, they did a brain scan of this woman, first on MTV and then on Oprah, and it was graphically manipulated to show that she had holes in her brain.
Look how almost moth-eaten it looks there.
She'd have been dead if she had all those holes in her brain.
Are you kidding?
Well, let's not talk about
Just
because drugs have risks is not a reason to criminalize them. Everything has risks.
You don't even know what the risks are.
I know more than you. I've researched it for a long time. I've funded research in animals and humans.
Już niedługo będę miał 14 000 subskrybentów.
MDMA is a highly neurotoxic substance after a single
O kurde, ale dobrze.
moderate dose.
And then later, they did an analysis of one of the primates' brains, and they discovered that instead of MDMA, they'd been giving methamphetamine. In 2003, and a study was retracted, and it was just a massive scandal. And I think that that was a sea change in attitudes towards MDMA. In 2000, Michael Midhofer and I met, and Rick's psychiatrist.
No co? Teraz mi tak średnio miesięcznie o 1000 subskrypcji wzrasta kanał. To jak co miesiąc będzie 1000 więcej, to 20 000 będę miał za 6 miesięcy. Szybko mi rośnie kanał.
MDMA therapy with a therapist several times, and that was, back when it was legal, and that was part of why we realized what an important tool this might be, because we experienced how much it helped us with honest communication and really being able to listen to each other without defensiveness or blame.
Everybody has issues if you're together for 50 years.
How did that 50 years happen, eh?
I coraz więcej ludzi na lajcie,
I think
nie?
we both were rebels and like bucking the system.
I went into psychiatry and
Myślę, że
joined me because
na tym lajcie będzie z 50 000 wyświetleń.
non-ordinary states of consciousness. we thought at that time that we wouldn't be able to do it with any of the medicines that had become illegal.
Sporo,
I think that was part of the frustration, that we knew that psychedelics had been used that way in the past.
But after a 2.5-year process of delay and frustration, we got the DEA permission in March of 2004, and a couple months later we enrolled our first person in our first phase 2 trial, which is the first time you give a drug to people with a diagnosis.
Właśnie, to jest tutaj dobry komentarz. Ciekawe, jak ci rośnie kanał, jak ty praktycznie nic nie mówisz. No i właśnie to jest ciekawe. Ja mam już prawie 14 000. Miesięcznie mi miesięczną oglądalność, ostatnie 28 dni mam 500 000 wyświetleń. Głównie z lightów. I miesięcznie mi przychodzi 1000 nowych subskrybentów. Co miesiąc. Każdego miesiąca 1000 subskrypcji więcej.
Which I have a traumatic brain injury. Stress and lack of sleep makes that worse. It's this giant downward spiral. My trauma started early. There was abuse in the household when I grew up. I then joined the military and was in Iraq 2005, 2006. Base I was on got mortared pretty much daily. On MDMA. It felt like I was underwater scuba diving.
Jezu, pamiętam, jak miałeś 3 osoby na lajcie i się cieszyłeś, gadałeś. No ja cały czas się cieszę. I w dalszym ciągu jest tak, że ja mam kilka normalnych tych widzów. Jak jest normalny komentarz, to odpowiadam normalnie.
My neighborhood decided to set off massive amounts of fireworks. To the point where my house was actually shaking.
Walisz kreatynę? Aktualnie nie, ale kupię sobie.
Then than I ever was in Iraq. I don't understand. I mean, I was in my closet, in body armor, physically shaking.
Ale kupię sobie.
That's no vacation, right?
No to na razie.
It's not like a magic bullet that everything's perfect. I mean, life is still kind of a struggle for all of us, right? But to see symptoms get better so that they can get up and work, or
nie potrzebuję moderatora.
or not be angry anymore at what happened. It just changes people's lives.
The other thing I've really been thinking about a lot is,
A jeszcze jednego steaka sobie zjem.
stuff stays going on. Just worry about like the anxiety and not going into crowds and just mostly the involuntary reactions.
But I'm wondering about taking a few minutes now just to feel that place in you that's longing for something different.
Co mam zamówić?
Maybe be present with that for a few minutes.
For probably the first 6 months, I was convinced this was just a temporary reprieve, and then it wasn't. I mean, I can remember the first day that I didn't think of killing myself. For the first time in 8 years. My story is the same story as millions of veterans. Where my story becomes unique is the fact that I took MDMA 3 times. It saved my life.
A kreatynę? No, kreatynę zamówię jakoś. Albo kupię se w sklepie. Ale chyba zamówię.
I was raised, in the 80s and 90s, the DARE era, where we had good drugs and bad drugs. Well, good drugs led to an opiate epidemic, and bad drugs heal PTSD, so I think our definitions of those need to change.
This is drugs. This is Good brain are drugs.
Kurde, 40 lajków.
Any questions?
Ten like będzie miał 50 000 wyświetleń.
Epidemic in this country, and no one is safe from it. Not you, not me.
Nie mogę zamawiać supli z Polski, nie mieszkam w Polsce. A do Szwajcarii nie przysyłają.
We got to the point in this country where you can't outright criminalize a particular people. That's against the law. But you can criminalize a substance that that particular group of people use and have a backdoor entrance into their communities. That is and was
Kto jest ujarany?
And we fill our prisons up with people. And we wonder why there's people that are so enraged with the system.
Ktoś się pyta, kto jest ujarany, nie wiem. Skąd mam wiedzieć?
I started off as a patrol officer. When they come into the police department for the start of their shift, patrol officers have to review dispatch logs to be caught up
Kto? No ty. Nie wiem, kto to jest ty. Się stało w oko nic.
Looks like there was a domestic violence here again. Somebody who has an alcohol use disorder got medically transported. Families having an issue with their son who has ADHD and anxiety. They went to the hospital.
Soczewkę mam.
There is so much information about human suffering in this computer system. What are we doing with it? Nothing.
W prawym czy w lewym oku?
Policing, arrest, and cultivate cases that play out in court.
Lewe oko. A coś mi musiało wpaść w robocie, jak wierciłem. Nie mam jeszcze. Nie wiem od ilu dają srebrne przyciski. Ja mam dopiero 14 000 subskrypcji. Nie mam.
What's at stake is people's lives, people's families. I'm noticing an uptick in stress in our police personnel. There's more police officers right now dying by their own hands and by their own firearms than there are officers being killed by others. So I went to the International Association of Chiefs of Police conference, and Dr. Doblin is there to present the preliminary research on MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. And I couldn't believe there was a hard science being done around this Schedule I substance showing how effective it is. So I asked Dr. Doblin, how can I help with this? He said, you know, the best way to help would be to become an MDMA-assisted psychotherapist. So I might be the only MDMA-assisted psychotherapy track trainee who is a working police officer. Yeah, my chief and I have been talking about heart-focused policing. You know, trying to build trust in the community. There's like years of reparative work that has to happen, and someone's got to suck it up and do it. You know? And then hopefully it'll make the job a little safer for our officers too.
Yeah, because for you and the other police officers, you're at the point of the spear. You have to deal with what it comes down to.
Right. I believe that if I'm going to be the best possible psychotherapist using this modality to help people, I got to understand where they're going and where they're coming back from.
Z telefona robię streama. Lighta robię lightowo z telefonu.
They're afraid of us. But I'm able to have these thoughts when I'm not getting sad.
Well, now you're just seeing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Seeing the truth.
Right. But it's not overwhelming me.
Nie piję alkoholu.
And I can explore sadness without becoming sad. I don't know how to do that.
I think you said it beautifully.
So there's a lot of tension right now. Trauma begets trauma. In high-risk situations, leading to tragedy, harming our police, harming our people. If they can access a therapeutic modality that can take that away, maybe these groups can start interacting with each other in a less aggressive and intense manner.
There's no way this is only good for PTSD.
To many people, this seems too good to be true. In therapy, this kind of change that we see in a couple hours is supposed to take years if it happens at all. So that's part of the challenge. People just have trouble believing it. All I can say is we have data that was collected with rigorous scientific design, and this is what the data is showing us.
Now, if we're to do a podcast 10 years from now, my prediction is, we can see if it comes true, is that there's going to be about 5,000 or 6,000
nie mam donate'ów.
throughout the United States.
Do love the fact that your strategy is so, you guys are patient and calculated, and you're doing it right.
So Rick Doblin's 35-year quest to get MDMA approved as a drug in therapy is nearing success. The phase 3, which is the last big step, large-scale trials of MDMA to treat PTSD, the results are in, and they're really impressive. 2/3 of the people in the study no longer qualified as having PTSD after they've gone through the trial. That's pretty astonishing. It's a very impressive degree of success. And the treatment effect, the measurement of how significant the effect was kind of
Masz jakąś rodzinę w
And
Szwajcarii?
all the tens of millions
No
of
nie mam
dollars
rodziny w
raised to
Szwajcarii.
do the phase 2
Sam
trials
mieszkam.
and the phase 2 trials of MDMA has all come from philanthropists. Not a dollar has come from the NIH, which funds most medical research in this country.
What we've done is unprecedented in drug development. If I had a full understanding of how difficult it was, and if I knew that it would take $100 million, and if I knew that in 1986, I would think that's impossible.
Yeah. I would not have bet on the success of this strategy 5 years, 10 years ago. But Rick would not be denied.
It didn't matter how long it took. And I'm just hoping that 2022, which will be roughly 50 years after I decided to go this route, that we'll have MDMA as a FDA-approved medicine, and then I'll be able to switch gears and become...
Żeby zarabiać dużo pieniędzy. Lubię pieniądze.
This entire 50 years has been a preparation for what I really wanted to do, which is to become a psychedelic therapist.
After I finished the study, some of the realizations and the way that my life changed continued to unfold for months after that. I would never say I'm completely healed.
W Polsce mnie cały czas szukają zamaskowani bandyci.
It's almost hard for me to put myself...
Nie szukali, tylko mnie cały czas szukają. Ale nie mogą znaleźć. W Polsce jestem poszukiwany przez zamaskowanych bandytów w kagańcach z bronią w ręku. Ale nie, pomimo tego, że robię codziennie lighty, nie mogą mnie znaleźć.
I used to feel a lot of anxiety and fear when I would arrive to my house by myself. I'd be walking up to the door.
Najważniejszy tip do życia to nie pić alkoholu,
and I would just be overwhelmed with like
uprawiać sport.
And a few months after we finished our session, I realized that the day that I had discovered my mother in that horrible scene,
jeść dużo soli,
in the background I could hear her dogs on the floor.
Jeść dużo mięsa.
And it was like, oh my goodness, how could I have forgotten that sound was such a soundtrack to that experience? And in realizing that, it really allowed me to completely reframe it. And now I don't have that problem. Like I can go home and hear the dogs, and I don't feel that anxiety and fear like I did before. And I think there are just instances that maybe aren't as blatant as that one.
I really have so much faith and belief in the power of this type of work that even though they move on into their everyday lives and challenges arise, they're able to kind of go back to this truth that they experience. It's like a light bulb has gone off, you know, and they can't
skończyłem uniwersytet w Częstochowie, pedagogikę z wychowaniem fizycznym. 5-letnie studia magisterskie dzienne.
Not only will VA embrace it, So will the Department of Defense, first responders, even law enforcement will embrace this. The fact that both myself and Rick Doblin were invited to speak at the International Association of the Chiefs of Police Annual Convention in 2018 speaks volumes. And when you have the people who literally ran the drug war now turning around and saying, we were wrong, this can help, that's a major thing.
If we hadn't been challenging, it's unclear whether MDMA would be where it's at right now in phase 3 and potentially becoming a FDA-approved medicine in association with psychotherapy.
Bracie, wygląda się jakby twój dom był siłownią. A ja w ogóle nie chodzę na siłownię, to jest najlepsze.
The data speaks for itself. And then suddenly psychedelics don't seem so
Szwajcarii.
We come through to the MDMA suite, a really, really beautiful clinic, and it's rewriting the way we do psychedelic medicine. And it's right here in the heart of Bristol.
Rick Doblin's vision and perseverance has paid off as MDMA
Stejka
gains government
ze
approval.
szwajcarskiej krowy.
This comes at the same time research into the therapeutic potential of LSD and psilocybin is flourishing. All three are drugs that were introduced to Western culture in the 20th century. But there is another psychedelic substance that humans have been using longer than any other for thousands of years, mescaline. Compared to the others, mescaline has largely been under the radar of science, even though it is prized as a sacred medicine by indigenous peoples in the New World. I wanted to understand why.
That we have with the medicine.
Ja ćwiczę ponad 30 lat.
A relationship that we have with creation.
This Mother Earth right here, I'm sitting on right here. It's you. These plants here, the air you breathe, it's you. The sun, the clouds, Peta, fire. The fire, it's you. Tate, wind, mini, space. Everything's about the energy, the movement of things. Things that move like this. Through the spiritual helpers, through the medicine, that's where the energy comes from. When you ingest that medicine, you're going to feel the spirit of this Mother Earth, the air, the water, and the light.
Różne rzeczy ćwiczyłem w swoim życiu. Zaczynałem od piłki nożnej w podstawówce. No i w podstawówce też zacząłem już robić, to chyba nawet jeszcze przed piłką nożną. No to zacząłem sobie robić pompki, takie rzeczy. No i do końca podstawówki byłem piłkarzem. Do tego pompki i takie tam. Później po podstawówce zacząłem chodzić na siłownię, ale chodziłem krótko, chyba tylko miesiąc chodziłem na siłownię. I znalazłem klub biegowy niedaleko mojego miasta. I zapisałem się i byłem biegaczem. Byłem biegaczem przez całą szkołę średnią. Później 5 lat studiów. A szkoła średnia też 5 lat. Technik telekomunikacji.
Mescaline is a chemical compound of phenethylamine, which is like MDMA, that is produced in two classes of cactus that we know about. One is the Peyote cactus.
No i jeszcze na studiach zacząłem trenować pływanie też.
sides of the Rio Grande River in
No
Mexico
i
in the United States.
siłowo to cały czas.
And this area is called the Peyote Gardens. It's the only place in the world where...
A teraz w kalistenice się jaram. Czyli podnoszenie na drążku, dipy, muscle upy.
It has mescaline in it. Not a tremendous amount. It's a very mild psychedelic. At a certain point, it dawned on me that this thing was hiding in plain sight. It was growing all over Berkeley, in garden after garden, right on the street. It's legal to grow it. It's one of the weird wrinkles of the drug law. It's illegal to grow
Nie piję alkoholu.
It's illegal to grow opium poppies.
Nie mam zwierzątek.
To grow cannabis. But somehow this plant, which is the source of the psychedelic, is perfectly legal to grow. So that is Wachuma. Growing this cactus, possessing this cactus is perfectly legal. When do you cross that line into manufacturing a scheduled substance?
So the moment that it's ever kind of used, prepared, and or ingested is when it becomes illegal.
As I began to research mescaline, I turned to my friend Erica Gagnon for her knowledge in the use of cactus and indigenous specifically Wachuma. So I learned it by another name, San Pedro.
Yeah, it's the same plant.
Yeah.
Wachuma is its original name from the south in Quechua. 500 years ago, when the colonists came and they were trying to destroy as much as possible of the original culture. And in colonialism, when you want to get rid of a whole population, aside from massacring people and killing everyone, you'll want to also go after the medicine keepers. And so a lot of the traditions had to go underground, had to be hidden. And they could see that this was a sacred cactus.
And they knew they used it in ceremony, and it had powerful effects on the mind.
Effects on the mind. And so in order to save it, they actually decided to give it another name. A
Christian name.
Yeah, exactly. So San Pedro, as you know, is St. Peter, who holds the keys
to the gates of heaven. When the conquistadors get to the Americas in 1492, they were, of course, Catholics. And I found a people who practiced very different religions than they were familiar
Waga 102 kilogramy.
They found natives who were using Wachuma, or San Pedro, and Peyote as part of their religious worship. People reported
102 kilogramy I 175 cm wzrostu.
They saw God. They visited God. They made it a very powerful sacrament and therefore a very threatening one. You render the priesthood superfluous if everybody can talk to God on their own. The Spanish tried to suppress its use and indeed wipe it out. The drug war, which I sometimes like to call the war on certain plants, really begins back then. In 1620, when the Mexican Inquisition declared peyote a heretical perversity, opposed to the purity and integrity of our holy Catholic faith. There was a list of questions you would use to interrogate a native, and one was, do you consume the evil peyote? The diabolical root, they called it.
Shoot you all the way back there. Slingshot.
Let go, see what happens. These efforts
Pół kilo miecha dzisiaj
of peyote failed.
Pół kilo stejka na kolację.
Native Americans have carved out a special use for the sacred cactus.
We're in this southern region of Texas here. This is our home, second home here.
Got that? Come on.
No. We ought to unify as indigenous people in prayer for the future of conservation, the future of reconnecting our children's children.
Nie ma to jak dobra kolacja.
The medicine and to the land, the Peyote Gardens. And the significance of it is the ancestral pilgrimage that occurred here a time ago.
Our ancient relatives knew of their lands, the medicines, the plants, the animals that grew on these naturally. Our celebrations of song and dance have a unique way of expressing the
motions. We make motions to the Great Spirit. And the ceremony is all about healing a sick person with this holy medicine. From the beginning, this Native American church, as it's known today, was a healing ceremony.
I've heard a lot of my elders talk about how this medicine started with a woman.
As the story goes, it was a woman that found this medicine, this peyote. A young lady, the chief's daughter, she was on a journey, told to ride the horse, go out to get away. There was white people coming. She rode the horse gave out, and she continued to walk. But she couldn't walk anymore. She became hungry, in need of water. She had fainted, collapsed. Some people would call it a dream or a vision. And the medicine bound her, talked to her. The message told her to consume this medicine. And as she did, she rejuvenated.
She developed that spiritual connection with that medicine.
She was able to continue on her journey. And the medicine told her to take her back to her people.
Some tribes, they call the medicine Mother Peyote.
She represents Mother Earth, the life giver.
History reveals no more tragic figures than the American Indian. He has been completely stripped of his freedom and dignity.
Kurde, jem drugiego stejka dzisiaj. Nie wiem, czy to przeżyje. Pół kilo wołowiny.
The creation of the Native American Church dates to the 1880s. And this was a moment of incredible trauma for Native Americans. It was official federal policy to essentially destroy Indian culture. People who had spent their lives traveling with the buffalo, living the life of hunter-gatherers, was forced onto reservations.
I think it's pretty well documented what the native people of this land's been through. Terrible.
The peace treaty of 1868, our people didn't ask for it. You know, the federal government that mandated says that 5 to 6 years old, your children's going to have to be put in school somewhere in Pennsylvania, Kansas City, Florida, where they don't even come from. Christianize them.
Before we could really understand what our life was about, then we were taken away from our parents and they started institutionalizing us. That's what I'm dealing with. You know, there was a lot of brainwashing that happened, and it's gonna, you know, take a lot of undoing.
I once heard, kill the Indian, save the man. Indian children were taken from their homes. Their hair was cut. They were placed in these boarding schools. Taken away. These children were physically, emotionally, spiritually abused.
Just recently, the unmarked graves of 751 Native American children were discovered on the grounds of a former boarding school in the Canadian province of Saskatchewan, sending shockwaves through the indigenous communities of North America.
Hard thing to even talk about.
There's a spirit that the government suppression wanted out of us, you know. And this medicine here starts to help heal.
It's part of our identity of who we are and how we survive. Maybe without this medicine, we would have been wiped out.
We have to remember that the right of Native Americans to use peyote has not been handed to them. They've had to fight for it. Ever since the founding of the Native American Church, there were people who regarded the Indian use of peyote with fear and suspicion, and it got caught up in prohibition. And then later it got swept up in the drug war. Peyote is Schedule 1, which means no recognized medical use. There was a famous case called Employment Division v. Smith. A Native American named Alfred Leo Smith, who worked for the Employment Division of the state of Oregon, was told by his superiors to stop attending Native American church ceremonies.
They called me in the office Monday and asked me if I would attend the Native American church ceremony, and I said I did. And they asked me if I ingested that mind-altering drug peyote, and I said no. I says, but I did take the sacrament, sacred sacrament. I says, and they says, well, you leave us no alternative, but we have to terminate you, you know.
So he took the case all the way to the Supreme Court. In a 1990 decision written by Justice Antonin Scalia, the Supreme Court ruled that the free exercise of religion in the First Amendment must give way to the needs of law enforcement to enforce the drug laws, and that religious pluralism in America is a luxury we can no longer afford.
An individual's religious beliefs do not exclude him
Jak będą pytania, to odpowiem.
otherwise valid law prohibiting conduct that the state is free to regulate.
So with that decision, Native American Church had lost its right to use peyote.
To reject respondents' argument that governmental action...
Why did the Europeans come here in the first place? It was for freedom of religion.
It's quite astonishing. You know, the country was founded on religious freedom. That's why we're here. And the idea that the people from whom we took the country in order to exercise our religious freedom were being denied theirs. How outrageous. This galvanized the church and began a campaign led by a Native American named Reuben Snake.
Here within this country, the indigenous people of this land continue to suffer these gross injustices and deprivation of our religious freedom.
Aided by the civil liberties establishment in America and the heads of almost every other religion who saw the danger in this decision, the threat to the free exercise of religion in the First Amendment. They began a campaign that resulted in a new
No to
law
ja już to mówiłem.
in
Na te pytania już odpowiadałem.
President Clinton, and that was a tremendous victory. The use of peyote as a sacrament was allowed and was protected by the First Amendment. Since the mid-1990s, the Native American Church and the peyote ceremony have grown in popularity as Native Americans work to heal themselves. And part of this means keeping the ceremony closed to outsiders, so filming of the ceremony is strictly off limits.
All ceremonies, recording devices are taboo. That spiritual oral space, it's just an invasion of that, But when you take that out, then you can
Pół kilo mięsa.
breathe better,
Nie wiem, czy ja to
What
przeżyję.
is sacred sometimes is a secret. This creator that we refer to is immanent in its own creation.
W piłkę nożną.
In us. And we live.
Ale nie gra w piłkę nożną. Ale kiedyś byłem dobry.
We have these ceremonial gatherings. We collectively lift our prayers up for healing, for sickness.
The peyote ceremony to help us with our emotional state of being, our trauma, our spirit. Let this land hear us once again, remembering our predecessors. Without their prayer and guidance, we wouldn't be here. Here we're building this,
Przez pierwsze 2 sezony grałem na forstoperze, a później przez następne 2 sezony na prawym ataku. Ale słaby. W ataku byłem gorszy, wydaje mi się.
Peyote has proved to be a powerful tool in the collective healing of the injustices done to Native Americans. But it is also used to heal individuals. I traveled to South Dakota to meet with a Native American church member who used the peyote ceremony to cure an addiction.
It's an honor to be here, and I appreciate your
To chyba Wandersar. Znaczy ja nie lubiłem piłki. Ja grałem w piłkę nożną tylko w podstawówce, a później już w ogóle nie lubiłem piłki nożnej. Ale z czasów podstawówki to mi się Wandersar kojarzy.
Participating in drug and alcohol use were becoming overwhelming.
I od tamtej pory ja już w ogóle nie oglądam piłki nożnej. Nie wiem, co się dzieje. Nie interesuje mnie to pod żadnym względem.
Our values, which are generosity, respect, wisdom, and courage. The things I do is power. I use peyote to get closer to God. It's not a drug. We don't use it as a drug. I'm just a humble kid walking below God. Try to stay out of trouble because I think it'll further me in life than getting into drugs, alcohol.
In my early 20s, I had started a family, 2 children. There was some difficulties. I left as requested by their mother. I was devastated and
Na wakacje może.
another way of life.
W tym roku byłem, raczej w tamtym roku byłem we Włoszech.
15 years of methamphetamine. It became a daily use. The darkness, intensity was getting a lot stronger, and I had a type of spiritual awakening, saying to myself,
Panie, po co nagrywać siebie, jak patrzy się w telewizor? Po to, żeby hajs zarabiać. Hajs, chodzi o hajs. Hajs i taka rozrywka moja.
I reached out to my uncle, Sandro Arnold, whom I grew up with throughout my life.
Chyba bardziej rozrywka.
Uncle, I am struggling.
Rozrywka, na drugim miejscu hajs.
I would like a ceremony. He said, nephew, don't worry. We got you.
No jestem w pracy.
We put up the teepee right where we're setting. And I prayed out here and I talked
Ktoś
to all
napisał,
these
no to do pracy. Ja jestem przecież w pracy.
waiting for me to help me.
Nie mogę się rozdwoić, nie mogę być w 2 pracach naraz.
That's the intent. They activated the spirit and it was in full movement. We enter the lodge before the sun goes down. There's essence of herbs that are burnt on the charcoals, and it started bringing my senses.
Nie mam zwierząt.
As they started to administer the medicine with the prayers and the energy, I could feel this rejuvenation. I can feel the fire start breathing with Mother Earth. My brain seemed to start having a movement to allow the medicine to take an in-depth doctrine from heart, mind, body, spirit. I knew this was my one chance. I cried for the Great Spirit to give me my
A nie wiem kiedy do stomatologa. Mam wszystkie zdrowe zęby, także nie mam potrzeby iść specjalnej.
There was hands massaging into my brain. I started making connections with ancient relatives, and I found my spirit in the ceremony.
Jak to się stało, że zamaskowani bandyci w kagańcach darowały ci akcje covidowe? Swoją drogą było to mocne z twojej strony. No nie darowałem i cały czas jestem poszukiwany przez zamaskowanych bandytów w kagańcach z bronią w ręku. Także nic mi nie darowały. Cały czas jestem poszukiwany. Ale nie mogę mnie znaleźć.
Understanding what power the medicine gives. My children are coming home. I'm able to ask my daughter, would you like a dress? The youngest, she replies,
Kurde, nie pamiętam na pierwszą komunię. Nie wiem, zegarek chyba, czy rower, nie wiem. Nie pamiętam. Dużo rzeczy dostawałem, takich małych. Jakąś kasę. Nie pamiętam. Nie pamiętam takich starych czasów.
But now I can look back and say, I'm not afraid to change my life. This medicine, it really helped me stand on my own 2 feet.
We're all trying to,
Yeah,
we're all trying to strive to be better than we were yesterday. We're all striving to have, that good health and happiness. We're all striving for something greater than us.
The vision of this world is a vision of blessed beholders, not a mere metaphysical construction. It is a visible world, a world which can be seen with the inner eye. The most beautiful thing in this
Nie robiłem bierzmowania.
which is a transference from something which is highly esteemed in the inner world into the outer world.
Jak wyjechałem?
Good evening, I'm Mike Wallace. Tonight's guest, Aldous Huxley, is a man of letters, as disturbing as he is distinguished.
Jak wyjechałeś do Szwajcarii? Wsiadłem w auto, zatankowałem, spakowałem się i przyjechałem do Szwajcarii samochodem.
You've even written about the use of drugs.
Well, now, this is a very interesting subject. I mean, I think it's
42.
that we may have drugs which will profoundly change our mental states without doing us any harm. I mean, this is the pharmacological revolution which has taken place, that we have now powerful mind-changing drugs. Some of these substances are related to substances existing in nature. For example, mescaline is the active principle now synthesized in the Indian peyote.
So mescaline is a molecule that's produced by these plants. But when you have mescaline by itself, it's been made in a laboratory. It plays a central role in the early part of psychedelic history.
Nie myślę o takiej rzeczy. Nie zastanawiam się nad rzeczami nierealnymi. Nie mam zdania.
But it really is Huxley, I think, who puts it on the map with Doors of Perception. Huxley's a very interesting character. He was a famous writer by the time he wrote Doors of Perception. He had written Brave New World. Huxley reads about psychedelics in the early 50s and reaches out to Humphrey Osmond. He's an Englishman doing research on mescaline in the province of Saskatchewan in Canada, looking at the healing properties. Huxley writes him and says, I'd really like to try this mescaline. Humphrey Osmond flies to Los Angeles, brings his mescaline sulfate, and was very nervous about it.
I didn't really want to end my career as a man who doesn't hold a snare.
Jaką szkołę średnią? Technik telekomunikacji.
And Huxley, one day in 1953, had this mystical experience on a couple 100 milligrams of mescaline.
Do Berna? Niedaleko, 150 km mam do Berna. Szwajcaria nie jest dużo.
At 11 o'clock. An hour and a half later, I was sitting in my study, looking intently at a small glass vase. I continued to look at the flowers, and in their living light, I seemed to detect
jakiś rock and roll. Muzyka lat 90., 80.
The books with which my study walls were lined glowed. red books like rubies,
Ale nie mam ulubionej płyty.
books bound in white jade, books of agate, of aquamarine, of yellow topaz, seem to be on the point of leaving the shelves to thrust themselves
No,
more.
elektrykę robię w Szwajcarii teraz.
From the books, my attention
Coś
turned to the
pokrewnego z
A
tym
small
coś.
typing table stood in the center of the room. When I looked down by chance and went on passionately staring by choice at my own crossed legs, those folds in the trousers, what a labyrinth of endlessly significant complexity. And the texture of the gray flannel, how rich, how deeply, mysteriously sumptuous. Huxley gets at what's unique about mescaline. It's less visionary than LSD. Hallucination is not a big part of the experience. It's very much about the body and feelings. It's not about escaping reality in any way. It's about plunging deeper into reality.
I think it would be extremely
Gdy się
good
pyta,
for almost
na co
anybody
liczę
with the
od
fixed
czyszczenia
idea
zębów,
of
no aż będę
the
miał zęby
uncertainty about
czyste,
what's
na to
what.
liczę.
To take this thing and to realize that the world he has constructed is by no means the only world, that there are these extraordinary other types of universe which we may inhabit and which we should be very grateful for inhabiting, I think.
Huxley had this experience, published the book a little bit later, and this is a seminal moment in the history of psychedelics. It led to an interest in psychedelics on the part of the Beat generation, and then later the hippies that followed the Beat generation.
W szwajcarskiej firmie
Huxley
robię.
influences Timothy Leary.
The effect is somewhat like looking through a microscope. Suddenly, when you look through a microscope, you discover that there's an invisible world around you that you hadn't known about before you did it. The same thing is true with a psychedelic drug. You're aware of processes that are going on inside your own brain.
Nie wiem jakie są instalacje elektryczne w Polsce.
Being very worried about Timothy Leary. He knew Timothy Leary.
6 words.
He tried to get Leary to cool it.
Turn on. Tune in. Run out.
Those are beautiful sized buttons. That one.
I with some Navajo Indians, Native American church there. They know how to use that medicine. So good.
There's always been a split in the psychedelic community between
Nigdy w Polsce nie robiłem jako elektryk.
approach. So you have
Nie wiem jakie są w Polsce instalacje, ale myślę, że się różnią.
change the culture. And then you had these elitists, and Huxley is one of them, who thought that was too dangerous. This is just such powerful news. If you give it to everybody, who knows what could happen? His theory was, let's give it to the best and brightest. And the thinking there was, give it to the influencers, and the new consciousness will filter down to the society. This battle still goes on today. One of the most interesting political movements to pop up in this country in the last couple of years is the decriminalized
Film ulubiony to mam, ten Lord of War, Pan Życia i Śmierci, najlepszy film.
Psilocybin, peyote, wachuma, decriminalized. Decriminalize is not the same as legalize. It basically means that you are ordering the law enforcement authorities to make this their lowest priority as long as it was just being done for personal use, no commerce involved. The group that has pioneered the decriminalization of psychedelics is based in Oakland.
October 20th, 2018, I had this really tremendous mushroom journey.
A w Szwajcarii.
I went into that journey because I was trying to heal over the passing of my mother and understand
Nie stać mnie na
my own
koszulkę.
trauma that made it so difficult for me to keep my relationships in the world, but also to ask the question, where does she go? A question that had haunted me my entire life about what happens when people die. I went straight into the infinite, to questions that you've been asking your whole life that you forgot you were even asking, and that are deep, meaningful questions that have impact on your sense of self. And it was so tremendously beautiful and amazing. Understanding it's all an interplay between the darkness, the fear of dying, and the thrill of life. In finding the thrill of life, we are creating beauty. And so that's where I committed that my life would be about the beauty of life.
No, mam kilku znajomych w Szwajcarii. Nie wiem, czy dobry, ale mam.
If you can just have access to some of these plant medicines, you can take control of yourself again. And it's really amazing how quickly things can change in your life. I experienced postpartum depression with my first child. People don't tell you you're going to have this baby and like you might not instantly love it, you know? And
Dużo Polaków w Szwajcarii? Nie wiem. Nie znam statystyk.
Having one kid is hard, having two, your life gets flipped upside down.
Ale na pewno Polacy nie są największą grupą
And it just got worse and worse.
Grupą w Szwajcarii. Z innych krajów jest więcej. Z Albanii jest bardzo dużo ludzi w Szwajcarii, z tego co słyszałem. Włochów jest bardzo dużo.
I felt that, well, the only solution to this problem is just to remove me from that equation.
Czy w Szwajcarii kary za trawę są duże? Nie wiem.
At that point, I was
Nie miałem nigdy kary
I was willing to try anything. I had heard about microdosing psilocybin.
Jakie jest moje popisowe danie? Steak.
I hadn't even tried a psychedelic before. But it was like, let's just see if this will work. And if it doesn't work, then I'll stop. The changes in me were so drastic.
Ale podejrzewam, że duże są kary, bo w Szwajcarii generalnie są duże kary. To
almost unbelievable.
tutaj są duże kary za wszystko, także. Za marihuanę pewnie też są duże. Chociaż nie wiem. Nie znam nikogo, co by miał karę za marihuanę. Chociaż słyszałem niby opowieść o jakimś gościu, którego złapali i wyszło mu na testach, że palił marihuanę. No to stracił prawo jazdy tam na jakiś czas. Musiał chodzić na testy narkotykowe, czy nie pali dalej. Miał dużo problemów. Także takie coś jest niedobre. Nie, na stałe w Szwajcarii.
The wrong person finding out about this could be detrimental to my life. I'm a DC government employee.
Czy szwajcarska czekolada serio jest taka dobra, czy to tylko tak się mówi? Nie wiem, ciężko. Czekolada. Ja jem często teraz taką czekoladę właśnie. Kurde, nie mam jej. Lubię tą szwajcarską czekoladę, ale czy ona jest lepsza od innych czekolad? Myślę, że nie. Że to już... Chyba jednak mit. W ogóle w jakiejś tam szwajcarskiej czekoladzie, już nie pamiętam marki, wykryli jakieś tam metale ciężkie czy coś, a to miała być jakaś niby czekolada premium i tam jakaś afera była. Nie, no jest dużo mark szwajcarskiej czekolady, nie tylko Lind. Ale właśnie ten Lind to chyba miał wpadkę, że tam coś znaleźli w tej czekoladzie.
Decriminalize nature. How did nature ever get to be criminalized? How did a plant species become a...
Ale mięso na pewno jest premium w Szwajcarii. Te steki, co jem tu, te szwajcarskie, czy od rolnika jak kupuję, to mięso jest 100 razy lepsze niż w Polsce. Znaczy, niż w polskim sklepie, ale czy od polskiego rolnika też? Nie wiem. Bo jak w Polsce mieszkałem, to nie kupowałem mięsa u rolnika. Bo mnie nie było stać, tylko kupowałem najtańsze mięso z Biedronki, żeby przeżyć. A tu w Szwajcarii sobie mogę pozwolić na to, że kupuję sobie zawsze najlepsze mięso. No ale dużo mnie to też kosztuje, no tak. Miesięcznie to wydaje z 1000 franków na mięso, nie? Na jedzenie. Nie zbierałem znaczków.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. Any abstentions? That motion.
Ale miałem kolegę, co zbierał znaczki pocztowe. Także wiem jak wygląda klaser i takie rzeczy.
This passed without a problem. Shocked everybody. After the success of Decrimination in Oakland, it's since spread around the country.
No stek jest lepszy od kanapeczki.
Based out of Carlos Pozzola's
Gdzie pracuje w Szwajcarii.
of what decrimination looks like. This is a movement that has grown to over 100 cities across the country. Decriminalize Nature DC campaign submitted over 36,000 signatures to DC Board of Elections.
Oj, z czasów szkolnych to miałem dużo przypałów.
This Policy Act of 2020 on the November presidential ballot. We're going to send a message to the country that we're decriminalizing plant medicines. This is the beginning of the further dismantling of the war on drugs and providing options for people to truly heal themselves.
Nie wiem, co to znaczy budowlanka. Czym się zajmuję w Szwajcarii elektryką.
I voted. I was just like pushed yes and then said your ballot's been submitted or something and I was just like, okay, I just did it. I voted on my own initiative and yeah, it was a really great moment for me.
Z Małopolski.
What is it?
Let's get over here.
Z Wolbromia.
6% of the vote. 76% of the
I fucking told you 70%!
Kurde, nie pamiętam pierwszego piwa.
Congratulations, man.
The weather's changing around us.
Ile czasu jestem w Szwajcarii? 3,5 roku.
But as politically adept as they have been, and as successful as they have been, they did run afoul of the Native Americans.
No, bardzo dobrze płacą w Szwajcarii.
In their ballot initiative.
Every generation has challenges. Today we have, this psychedelic renaissance as our challenge.
No, obwąchiwali mnie czasami.
The challenge of taking peyote out of the decrimination movement is...
Czy jestem samotny? No jestem. Jestem typem samotnika, no.
So they're really uncomfortable with
Lubię chyba być sam.
carving out this exception. So I see their point. On the other side, I see the point of Native
Zależy o
Americans.
jakich Polakach.
They were afraid that this
O dobrych Polakach mają dobre zdanie, o złych Polakach mają złe zdanie.
and that people would come down poaching in the peyote gardens. Peyote takes about 15
No,
years.
piguły jakieś tam brałem kiedyś. Grzybów nie brałem.
It grows very slowly, and that's the problem. Peyote and the peyote lands are endangered in the United States, as well as
Nie wiem, czy amfetamina i kokaina to są psychodeliki, no to takie brałem.
in the Sierra Mountains in Mexico.
Ale właśnie grzybów nie brałem, nie jadłem nigdy.
Every year or so, the Huichols conduct a pilgrimage to gather peyote.
Ale nie wiem, zawsze jakoś się bałem tych psychodelików. Bo takie opinie chodziły dziwne, że niektórzy, jak tam faza ich przerasta, że mogą z okna wyskoczyć. Bałem się zawsze spróbować psychodelików. Żałuję, ale bałem się.
Destruyendo los jícori que están ahí, se están acabando los manantiales.
No właśnie są takie zakłamane opinie i przez to się bałem właśnie zawsze. Pamiętam, że jeszcze jak na studiach byłem, to taki gościu właśnie, co chciał sobie zjeść grzyby, to wziął mnie, żebym go pilnował. Bo tak się bał, taka opinia była chora wtedy o grzybach, że jak się zjada grzyby, to się nie kontroluje tej fazy i ktoś może przez okno wyskoczyć. I moje zadanie było takie, że siedziałem z tym gościem po prostu. On oczywiście nie chciał wyskakiwać przez tego okna. Fazę miał lajtową, bo w sumie nie zjadł jakoś dużo tych grzybów. I na tyle się skończyło moje zadanie, ale nawet ten gościu, co już nie pierwszy raz brał grzyby, jadł grzyby, przez tą opinię taką chorą o tych stymulantach prosił mnie o to, żebym go pilnował, żeby nie zrobił czegoś głupiego. Nie? I przez to właśnie opinię takiej, te rzeczy, co się nasłuchałem o psychodelikach, to nigdy w życiu tego nie próbowałem. Bo bałem się po prostu, że nie zapanuję nad fazą.
This tension about who should be able to use peyote and who shouldn't continues to grow. The IPCI, the Indigenous Peyote Conservation Initiative.
No bo chciałbym wiedzieć, to czemu szkoda, bo chciałbym wiedzieć, jaka jest faza po grzybach. I podobno to jest w ogóle lecznicze, nie? Psychodeliki. LSD jest uznawane już teraz jako lek. Także no żałuję, że chciałbym spróbować.
For us as indigenous people to take care of what was bestowed upon us as generational responsibilities.
Ale spróbuję na pewno.
This place here, this 605 acres here, is a answer to a prayer of our elders.
Indigenous people, conservation's always been a part of us.
Nie. Mieszkam niedaleko Lucerny.
Only what you need.
I agree with making a synthetic version, so that way the non-Indian would be able to utilize this.
Nie miałem styczności z ayahuaską, ale też chcę spróbować. Zrobię w wolnym czasie lighty, robię, ćwiczę kalistenikę, podróżuję. Ja nie mieszkam w Polsce, ja mieszkam w Szwajcarii. I to mało tego, ja wam powiem, bo pytaliście o przypałową akcję z podstawówki, czy to było już ze szkoły średniej. Ja tak się bałem tej fazy od grzybów, powiem wam, że ja nawet namówili mnie koledzy, żeby pojechać z nimi na grzyby. I ja zbierałem osobiście moimi rękami te grzyby, psychodeliki, bo tam niedaleko mojej miejscowości, w której tam się wychowywałem, to rosły te grzyby. I wszyscy ci moi koledzy się nawpieprzali tych grzybów, a ja się bałem spróbować. I po prostu zbierałem te grzyby i im oddałem i oni se zjedli. Ale nawet w takiej sytuacji się znalazłem w życiu, że zbierałem te grzyby, ale tak się bałem fazy, że nie spróbowałem ich.
This message is being more and more widely embraced.
Which will decriminalize the possession and personal use of certain psychedelic substances.
I was very interested to see that when the California State Senator Scott Wiener introduced a bill to decriminalize
Jak nie chciałbym kraj odwiedzić, Rosję chciałbym odwiedzić. Rosję lubię. Rosję, Moskwa, Petersburg zobaczyć.
Other cities are now excluding peyote from their initiatives too.
Rosję, Chiny chciałem zobaczyć, Japonię. A chyba pierwsze miejsce Rosja. Kojarzysz bieluny? Kiedyś się jadł? Nie kojarzę. Nie kojarzę, no mówię, ja nie jadłem nigdy takich psychodelików. Nie wiem, co to jest. Raz w życiu zbierałem właśnie, ale nawet pomimo tego, że nazbierałem tych grzybów, to bałem się ich spróbować i oddałem wszystkie kolegom.
And it's the meanings we put on them, the uses to which we put them that really matter. They're not inherently good and they're not inherently evil. They're tools.
No potęga. Rosja jest potężnym krajem. W samej Moskwie żyje 15 milionów ludzi. Chciałem to zobaczyć.
And we use them in a pretty careless way. Took a tab of LSD and went to a concert or walked around the beach and people got into trouble.
Dobra, ja kończę tego lighta. Trzymajcie się, jutro muszę iść do roboty. Idę spać. Nie wierzę w istotę pozaziemskie. Dobra, idę spać.
Someone who knows the territory very well, who's presiding.
Marzenie zrobić maselapa. Maselapa chciałem zrobić w tym roku.
There's always an
Na razie.
intention, a purpose to what you're doing, and you're treating that sacred. In order to achieve